Hi everyone. This is just going to be our first video as an introduction to Illustrator. So we'll start from the beginning. I'll try to move quickly. My goal is just to show you some basics about just opening a file, about artboards, and then to show you how to begin to use the shape tools as a way to build imagery. So I'm just going to go up to File, New. I'm thinking maybe you won't see the word file, but you'll see the word new because of the way the screen is set up. And then you'll see it comes up with a new document. You can just name that now if you want. And here it's asking you the number of artboards. I'm not going to go into depth about the artboards. Your artboard is basically just your working space. What's nice about Illustrator is that it has a space that's sort of your final piece of art, and then the rest is the scratch board, so you can have things kind of lingering in the sidelines that may not be in the actual design. If you're familiar with Photoshop, it's a bit different, so I think it's kind of a nice feature about Illustrator. And then here there are lots of different custom sizes that are already built in. For our purposes, for our first assignment, for instance, it's a square format, so I just typed in 20 by 20. You can make it, whatever. I'll make it 10 by 10. And then under units, you'll notice sometimes when you open Illustrator for the first time, it defaults to points, which for a lot of people is foreign and doesn't make a lot of sense. So you can just change it to inches if you want. So I'm just going to do 10 by 10. And you can choose your orientation. If you're working with a bleed, you can do that here, but we're going to kind of leave it as is. So you can just open your file. So here you'll see that you have your artboard. Just as a quick note, if you hit Shift-O, you get the boundaries of your artboard here. You can pull those in to reshape your artboard if you want. You can redraw it. And then up here at the top, you can see where it says width and height. You can also change the size of your artboard at any time up here. So if I decided I wanted this to actually be 12 by 12, I could do that and it would just resize the artboard for me. So that's Shift-O to resize the artboard. So like anything, I think it's important to kind of set up your workspace how it makes sense for you. I typically have my tools over on the left. I like it in a double column like this. Some people like it in one big row. It's kind of up to you how you want to do that. I also like to make sure that I have windows open. So up at the top of the screen under Window, you can pull up these different ones here. So Appearance is a good one to have up. Also Layers. I like to make sure that I have both of those open when I'm working. I also like to have the Pathfinder tool out, which I'll detail in a different video. But I kind of like to have all those here. They're also default to having all of these other ones kind of in the sidelines here that automatically come up. So you can see those over on the side here. So just to start, over here are all your tools. The tools that we're going to focus on today are the Shape tool, which is here. And then also we'll take a look at these direct selection tools as a way to edit these kind of ready-made shapes. Just as a quick note, any of these tools that have this small triangle in the bottom right, that just means that there are more tools nested under that particular symbol. So it might make sense to check those out and see what the different tools are under there. So you can see if I hold down my mouse, I get the other tools that are kind of nested under there. So let's hold that down for the Shape tool, for instance. And then one important feature about Illustrator that I really like is over here there is what's called a tear bar. So if you click on that, what happens is it pulls that tool out as its own window, so that rather than having to go here and choose the different nested tools, it's got them all ready for you right here so that you can kind of interchange between any of these. So, and also the other feature with Adobe programs is that if you're just not sure what something is, if you just hover over it, it'll show you what that is. And you'll also see in parentheses a letter, and that just tells you what the shortcut is. So I think it's really important when you're first starting working with programs to try to start thinking about those shortcuts, because it really does save you time. So rather than going over here and clicking, if you just hold down the letter M, you get the rectangle tool, or an L for the ellipse tool. So if you start thinking about those things, I think it's helpful for your workflow. So I'm just going to choose a rectangle to start. And if you've used any Adobe programs, there are some very similar things here where if you just click and drag, that allows you to draw something. And if you, like in Photoshop, if you hold down Shift, it constrains the proportions of things. So you can see if I hold down Shift, it's going to make a square rather than making a rectangle. So I'm going to delete those. The other feature is that if you hold down Shift and Option while you're drawing, it draws from the center instead of drawing from the edges. So I'm holding Shift and Option. And then, see, I just draw from the corners normally. Shift and Option allows me to draw from the center. One of the biggest differences with Illustrator, especially if you're using shapes, is that I think sometimes people get a little tripped up with the fact that you're having both a stroke and a fill. And so one of the things that I just want to make sure to stress is that just because that is a feature of Illustrator doesn't mean you always have to have a stroke or a fill. So basically a stroke is an outline and a fill is just the color that fills the shape. So in the beginning, I find that when students are first using Illustrator, sometimes they make every shape have a stroke, which means every shape has an outline, and that's just not necessary. So just know that just because it's there doesn't mean you have to use it. So there are several ways to change the way that a shape looks. So once you draw your shape, you'll see it's selected. You can just pull on any of these handles to change the size or the shape. You can rotate it, a lot like the free transform tool that you might be familiar with from Photoshop. And then it also has these live corners where if you click and drag, you can see that it allows you to round out those edges if you so desire. So it defaults to this white fill black stroke. So up here is your options panel, and you can easily just go into the fill and change it into something else. You can choose to have a different color stroke. You can also choose to have no stroke. So this no sign means none. So this would be a shape with a green fill and no stroke, whereas we could do the opposite here. Green stroke with no fill. And you can change the size of the stroke. If you click on the stroke window, you can see you can make the corners be round. You can change the weight of the stroke within here. You can make dashed or dotted lines. You can tell it if you want the stroke. Where do you want the stroke to be? Do you want it to be equally on either side of the line that you draw, to the inside or to the outside? It defaults to this first one. So you can see some of your options there with how to work with the strokes and the fills. So one of the most important things with this is that if I'm in this with this black arrow, this is called my selection tool. So what that black arrow does is it allows me to just choose the whole shape. You might notice too that I'm clicking on the border of this shape. If a shape does not have a fill, it's basically clear in the middle, right? So if you click in the middle of the shape, it doesn't do anything because there's nothing there for the cursor to grab. So if you have no fill, you have to click on the stroke in order to move that shape around. So using the black arrow, it's kind of a general broad selection tool. I can select multiple shapes by drawing a box around them. I can select a whole shape. And then this direct selection tool is a little bit different because what that does is it allows you to then select these active corners I mentioned earlier. And then it also allows you to select these handles. So you can see if I click on that handle, I can begin to edit this shape by pulling around on these anchor points and these handles that are on the shape. So black is general, and the direct selection tool, which is the white one, is more specific. So if I click A, which is the shortcut, you can see I can double click on these and start moving around these anchor points. So sometimes it's easier to just sort of draw with these basic shapes and then go back in with these selection tool or the direct selection tool to edit the shape of those objects. So just like we used here with the rectangle tool, you have all of these other tool options to work from. There's a star tool if you'd like to make star shapes. Once you click on the star shape, if you click once on the artboard, it pulls up this window and you can tell it you want however many points. So maybe you want a 300 point star. You can see that made a little bit of a ridiculous one here. So many points, you can't hardly see it. So again, if I click once on the board, it gives me this option window. Let's just do a traditional one. Let's see. And that same thing works for all of these. If I click on the rectangle tool, if I just click once on the artboard, I can direct the program to make something exactly how I want it. So I can tell it, you know, I want a 10 by 10 inch rectangle, and it'll make that for me. So just single click rather than clicking and dragging. This polygon tool, again, I can click once. It asks me how many sides I want. So if I would like a triangle, for instance, I can click OK. And again, I can edit these things just like all those other things. I can mess with the anchor points. I can use the direct selection tool here to go and pull on these handles, drag the anchor points around to reshape these existing shapes if I want. I can change the stroke or fill. So you can really just, you know, do all kinds of things with those. And with all of these, if I hold down Shift, so it makes an equilateral shape, whatever it's going to be. So an equilateral triangle or a circle. And if I hold down Shift and Option, I can draw from the middle and keep it regular as I draw out from there. I'm going to delete all of these. So if you want to move away from a shape that you're drawing, you can either just have the selection tool and click off of the artboard. You can Command Shift A, which is deselect. I use that constantly. I would recommend that you remember that shortcut. It's a lot shorter than going up to the top to select and deselect. But Command Shift A is deselect and allows you to move on to another shape and deselect the one that you're working on. And then one other quick tool I just want to show you, which is sort of a newer tool, is this one, which is called the Shaper tool. I like this tool. It's kind of fun to play with. Again, with the Shaper tool, you can choose your stroke and your fill. The Shaper tool is nice because let's say I wanted to draw a triangle. I could just sort of roughly draw a triangle or a circle or a diamond or a star, maybe not a star. And Illustrator will guess what it thinks I'm drawing and turn it into a geometric shape. Once I have it drawn, then I can edit it all, you know, exactly like I edit all of my other shapes. But it allows you to sort of freely draw geometric shapes, and then it'll kind of make a guess as to what you're trying to do. It doesn't respond so well to sort of, you know, more organic shapes. So you can see, if I draw that, it defaults to something that's geometric and more regular. So it mostly applies to kind of nameable geometric shapes that you might want to use that. Okay.